Sikh leaders are calling for the federal government to rescind the Indian Prime Minister's invitation to the G7, saying the invite of Narendra Modi is a deep betrayal of Canada's core values.
A U-turn. Inviting Mr. Modi at this time was the wrong decision. Having this conversation without clear-cut public statements. We ran a public inquiry. We had a public safety committee that sat down in October of 2024 around violence and agents of the government of India committing those acts of violence in Canada. So basically the question starts popping up in our minds, what was the last year and a half for? Like, the last government did all this work. Within 1 month, it feels like it's being completely reversed. The slate is being wiped clean, and we're going to be right back where we were just over 2 years ago, where activists in our community and the broader community and these extortions and everything else is going to go back to what it was, which is horrible.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has defended the invitation, saying it's important to have major world leaders at the table when there are big challenges to discuss. Alberta NDP MP Heather McPherson says the invite amounts to an attack on Canadian democracy itself.
Not a Sikh issue. This is not an issue for just one community. I mean, that means that any member of parliament could be silenced. And the minute we start being silenced by a foreign government, that's foreign interference.
Balpreet Singh is the legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada, and he joins me now. Mr. Singh, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
What message, we heard some strong language there, what message do you think Prime Minister Modi's attendance is going to send to the Sikh community about how the government sees this issue?
It's painful. It doesn't get worse than a foreign government surveilling and trying to kill a federal leader in Canada, monitoring their family movements, their movements. And this is to kill them. Any other government doing this to a federal leader here, I would assume we would not roll out the red carpet and say, let's have a few days together in the mountains. So this feels really like a betrayal.
Okay, we're talking about Jagmeet Singh, the former NDP leader, who we knew was under police protection because of a foreign threat against his life, or at least to do him physical harm. What we learned in the Global News reporting is that it was someone connected with the Bishnoi gang, which is the notorious gang that's apparently involved in this out of India, and that they were on close surveillance of Mr. Singh and his family. And now that he's out of politics, he no longer qualifies for security.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand how this all fits together. So during the public safety inquiry, the committee, it was revealed that this whole terror operation that India is running has come from Amit Shah, who's the Home Minister and the right-hand man of Narendra Modi. What's happening is that diplomats here, proxies here, are surveilling and passing on information to agents in India, who are then passing that on to the Bishnoi gang, who are targeting Sikhs and others for violence here. There have been at least 3 murders, extortions, shootings. Just last month, the Bishnoi gang took responsibility for the murder of a Sikh businessman in Mississauga. So the same gang is now surveilling Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, and we're inviting Narendra Modi, who is at the head of this, to Kananaskis for a discussion.
Have you had any official response from the Carney government, from anyone in his ministry, from security officials, the RCMP? Because I remember last Thanksgiving, Monday, very well, when Commissioner Mike Duhem went public with the details they had about this campaign of violence and intimidation that they linked back to the Indian government. There's no evidence that it's stopped, right? So have you had any response from the government of Canada about your concerns since you started raising them?
We first raised this issue in June 2024. We wrote to Prime Minister Trudeau's office. We wrote again on May the 21st to Prime Minister Carney's office. And to this date, we have not received an acknowledgement or a response. Now, we have met with members of his caucus. We've met with a number of Sikh MPs, and 2 of them have been vocal about their opposition, Sukh Dhaliwal and Gurbakh Saini. A number of them have told us that they aren't able to speak out, that they agree with us. But as one individual, I'm not going to say who, said to me, he said, Jagmeet spoke out, and look where it landed him. So why would I speak out?
But I know you've been raising these concerns publicly on a broad level, but I mean specifically since the invitation of Narendra Modi. I know Sukh Dhaliwal, he was on the show last week talking about this. He's since met with the Prime Minister to raise his concerns. Has your organization heard anything back about the decision to make the invitation?
What I've heard is that we have to trust Prime Minister Carney, that he knows what he's doing. But when I heard his response on June the 6th, he said that, you know, India is such a large country and they have so much influence in terms of the trade that's happening, supply chains. And when he was asked about the Niger assassination, he waffled. He said that this is a law enforcement issue and he doesn't want to comment on it. That's a 180 from how Prime Minister Trudeau dealt with it. He was very clear that this is unacceptable, that this will not be allowed in Canada. And that was appreciated by my community. But seeing things change so rapidly, it's hurtful. Like, I can't say it anymore. 3 murders, plus trying to kill the leader of a political party because of who he is, his identity. This is a Canadian issue, but it really feels as though people are looking at it, particularly this government, as, you know, this is just a Sikh issue and that we'll deal with it with India. It's unfair.
I know the answer you're speaking about from Prime Minister Carney. I took that to mean he wouldn't talk about specific aspects of the legal processes because it is moving through, you know, a federal investigation involving the National Police Force. And I didn't take it as sort of I don't take the issue seriously. Am I misinterpreting it? Or because I thought it was a Prime Minister trying to avoid getting entangled in something that is moving through the legal system.
To be honest, when we compare it to how Prime Minister Trudeau addressed this issue,
right,
it's much weaker, like noticeably weaker. And that hasn't just registered for us. The way the Indian media are portraying this is a complete capitulation, that Canada has bent the knees and that everything Prime Minister Trudeau had said about India's interference was a lie. And we've actually seen threats against the Sikh community increase. We had a senior editor at an Indian media outlet say that they will target Sikhs, Khalistanis, he called them, on Canadian soil, and he ended that quote with "cope."
I asked this question not to downplay your concerns, but what we hear from people who've worked in the world of diplomacy, there is the issue that the Prime Minister did raise, that India, the largest population country on earth, number 5 economy, there's Modi and there's India. India belongs at the table. Modi, I accept that it is not as easy a calculation to make. What do you make of this argument, though, that because it is the G7, it's not Canada and India getting together for a formal meeting, it's more of a consensus-driven thing, and it's the other G7 countries have relations with India and want them at a table like this?
Dialogue is okay. Unconditional dialogue, for me, it looks like appeasement. So the U.S. has renewed their ties with India based on an agreement that India will look into the murder-for-hire plot against Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. And there's a committee that's looking into it, and they will report back. In Canada, India has refused to even acknowledge they were involved in anything. They, in fact, thumbed their nose, saying that this is all made up, this was all electoral politics to court the Sikh vote. This is completely unprincipled. There are no concessions. There are no concrete steps moving forward. There's not even an acknowledgement that India won't kill any more Sikhs on the ground. I mean, we've just gone and given them an invitation carte blanche. And that, to me, is not diplomacy. That's, once again, appeasement.
The Prime Minister did say, if I remember correctly, in the readout he issued after his conversation with Prime Minister Modi, and in some of the media he did, that he stressed this importantly, India has agreed to continue the conversation about law enforcement cooperation. What do you take from that statement?
We know that prior to the October announcement, there was ongoing dialogue between law enforcement and intelligence in Canada and India, and we know that went nowhere. There have been no assurances given. So this isn't something new. This so-called dialogue has been going on for a very long time. And India keeps, once again, thumbing its nose at Canada and saying, well, we did nothing and you can't prove otherwise. So I'm not looking forward to this so-called dialogue. In fact, what has happened on every single so-called Canada-India dialogue that's happened in the past has been that Canada has received a list of Sikh activists that India wants deported, saying that they are terrorists, and Canada has responded back saying, well, you've not given us any evidence, and they seem to be just exercising political speech that you disagree with. That's what we're looking at.
So just as a final question, obviously at this stage, the invitation is not going to be rescinded. I think that seems obvious at this point. So what sort of an outcome could there be from this meeting at the end of day Tuesday or in the days after that would say to you that maybe this was worth it? Or is there anything that could happen that would make you think that?
Well, the hurt has been already felt by my community. So we, as collective organizations, have come up with three things that we want. We still want that invitation to be rescinded until India agrees to cooperate with the criminal investigations that are happening. But we want a full public inquiry into India's transnational oppression in Canada. This is a 40-year history that we're looking at. A lot of stuff has happened, but just in the past few years, 3 murders, just to lead that off. And then finally, we want intelligence sharing between Canada and India to be stopped until, once again, there are assurances that human rights will be respected. And we know for a fact that false information has flowed from India, which has resulted in real harm to Sikhs here in Canada. So unless there are actual concrete announcements made to show that these concessions have been obtained from India, that India will at least not kill people, it's difficult for us to say, well, it's okay, the dialogue has happened.
Okay. We've got to leave it there. Balpreet Singh with the World Sikh Organization. Again, I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here today, sir. I just want to sort of get back to the G7 issue, because I want to get Matthew and Shachi on this, because in 3 days, the leaders will convene in the Rocky Mountains, and they have that extra attendees on the list. The really controversial one for a lot of Canadians is Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who will be attending. And if there wasn't enough controversy around his invite, today, Global News reported that a suspected Indian government agent had former NDP leader Jagmeet Singh under close surveillance last year. And that led to the RCMP placing Singh under police protection due to a credible risk to his life. And the World Sikh Organization is now calling on the Prime Minister to withdraw Modi's invite to the G7.
If targeting a Canadian political leader on Canadian soil isn't enough to be barred from entering Canada, then where is our red line? Where do we draw that line? In fact, it seems there is no red line when it comes to our community. It's telling Sikh Canadians that our lives simply don't matter.
Okay, Matthew, your thoughts there. I mean, we had Balpreet Singh in the studio earlier, and you can sense their frustration and hurt there. Mr. Singh, Jagmeet Singh, no longer has police protection because he's not a national political leader. What do you make of the concerns being raised there and how this could blow back on the government?
I think they're very legitimate. One of the things that Balpreet Singh, your previous guest, said that was very chilling is when he said that he spoke to individuals who didn't want to speak out precisely because of what had happened to Jagmeet Singh. Look at what happened to Jagmeet was, I think, how he articulated it. And I think that is the epitome of foreign interference, is the leader of a federal party who, for some of that time, presumably, or at least in the lead up to it, was in an agreement with the governing party, to the supply and confidence agreement. So who was in a position of influence being, and it doesn't even matter, right? Any member of parliament, and quite frankly, like any Canadian being dealt with that way by a foreign government on Canadian soil is unacceptable and scary. And I think that what this does is, I hear a lot of people trying to rationalize this by saying, the economic weight of India, the fact that diplomacy sometimes means talking to people we don't agree with, we don't like, or whose values we don't share. But the reality here is that, first of all, this goes beyond sharing values. There are allegations out there of crimes, including murder, being committed on Canadian soil. Like, this isn't just a polite disagreement between neighbors. And then add to that the fact that this isn't about maintaining diplomacy, having diplomats there, an ambassador, even the Prime Minister having a phone conversation with his counterpart in India. This is extending an invitation to be part of a G7 at a time where, as we were mentioning earlier, there is potential rearranging of the world order in light of other dynamics. And so the message that sends to communities is incredibly troubling. And it's not just about India vis-a-vis the Sikh community. It goes back to the point that I made earlier, is that if this government is exercising this kind of judgment, then in what other instances is there going to be a willingness to look the other way if it means getting the economy right? I appreciate that that's where public sentiment is at, that's what's driving the bus, but sometimes there are things that are unpopular and not necessarily top of mind for Canadians, but where as a federal government, you have a responsibility to be, responsible for, and I don't think that this is that.
Shachi, how do you see this one? Because the calibration on this one, they've made it clear how they view it, but this has upset quite a few people.
Sure, it has, and it's controversial within the broader Canadian population. It's controversial within the South Asian population in Canada. There are about 800,000 Sikhs in Canada. the gentleman from the WSO, Mr. Singh, does not speak for every single Canadian Sikh, but let us say a few things. Every Canadian on this soil has a right to feel safe, has a right to justice in the face of crimes committed, and has a right to see that justice pursued in court and by police. And every victim of crime and murder deserves that. And so too does Mr. Nijjar, and Mr. Jagmeet Singh has a right to feel safe.
Right.
Absolutely. There's those things are clear lines that you can't argue against. Now, what do you do if you're a Liberal government in a situation where there is pressure economically and otherwise to normalize diplomatic relations with the government of India? Also, we saw this in some ways through the Chrétien years, where that line between engaging China, trying to look past a lot of the post-June 4th Tiananmen Square concerns around human rights and rule of law, really disturbing stuff, ended up, taking a back seat, for better or for worse. Many would argue for worse, to economic considerations. These are the lines that Canadian leaders have to walk. Canadians themselves, through public opinion, are going to weigh in on these issues. And there's no doubt that Canadians are looking at Delhi with a far more jaded eye than they used to. Prior to the Nijjar murder, you'd had a plurality or more of Canadians who said, look, we view India as an ally, as a friendly country, as one we want to do business with.
Right.
That number, there's no doubt about that, has declined. We'll see what the staying power is around all of these issues, and whether it continues to be front and center, or whether it for whatever reasons, fades into the background.
Yeah, Cameron, Shachi is exactly right that no diaspora community is completely monolithic on their views on things. Certainly not people coming from a country as vast and complex as India. But there is no evidence this campaign of transnational repression has ended. And I understand the argument that India deserves a seat at the table. The issue is Narendra Modi, less India, right? So is there a chance that this, I don't know if this completely overshadows it, provokes a backlash? I'm coming to you first so you don't have to follow James again. What are your thoughts on how this manifests itself sort of at the summit and afterwards?
I think there's a chance that it might overshadow a lot, at least domestically, in the domestic conversation it might. But if on one hand, strategically speaking, in the context of the G7, it makes a lot of sense for the Prime Minister, for Canada, to be reaching out to not just, countries that have a economic weight in the world. And if you just look at it from that lens, you cannot ignore India. Every single one of our major allies is working on their relationship with India, frankly, has growing and good relationships with India. Where there is a specific and legitimate concern is with the actions taken by the Indian government towards Canadian citizens, and today's absolutely outrageous allegations in the Global, reported by Global, regarding Jagmeet Singh are just completely unacceptable. And so yes, as Shachi said, politicians have to walk these lines. Leaders have to walk these difficult lines. When you engage more broadly with the world, and you bring in countries that are not traditional allies, or countries that have difficult human rights records but have an outsized economic weight, you're going to have very difficult conversations. But with India right now, in the context of the past 2 years, where they have done things and alleged to have done absolutely horrible things to Canadian citizens, there absolutely must be accountability for these allegations. It must lead the conversation bilaterally between Canada and the Prime Minister Modi. And perhaps there's an opportunity to actually raise, I think it's actually one of the stated focus topics of the summit, is to talk about countering foreign interference. There is no greater example of foreign interference in Canada right now.
I don't know if that conversation is going to happen with Mr. Modi in the room, though. I do not believe India is part of that session, right?
Yeah, right. But it's still a topic that is going to be a focus of the G7. And with his presence there, it is something that there is no way out for Canada to be bringing this up and talking about it. Right. And frankly, everyone else will.
James, was this a mistake by Mark Carney, or was it a necessity by Mark Carney?
Not necessarily a necessity, but the right move. But first of all, I agree with Cameron. Smart, substantive, suave, thoughtful. Paying back the compliment. There you are. But look, it's entirely appropriate. And look, you can have guest after guest on the show, right? And I've seen it on your show and some other shows, saying that we shouldn't have China here. We shouldn't have Xi Jinping. And then you have a roster of reasons. We shouldn't have Narendra Modi, a roster of reasons. We shouldn't have Donald Trump on a roster of reasons. It's a big, complicated world with complicated and intertwining relationships. And there's a lot of sin to go around and a lot of disruption to go around, to be sure. But I remember, for example, when we hosted Narendra Modi in Canada, and I had the privilege as regional minister for BC to host him in British Columbia, and the World Sikh Organization said it was an outrage and an affront to human rights that Narendra Modi was here 10 years ago, and that we should never invite him for a bilateral visit. So there are going to be people who are going to be against these kinds of visits at any time. The challenge is to counterbalance the interests of individual actions that require transparency, accountability, and a due process, with also the broader reach and the broader responsibility of Canada to be a player on the world stage at a time when everybody talks a good game about diversifying trade, taking advantage of our global reach and all these opportunities, and all that is true. Well, sometimes that means you do have to put a little water in your wine. You have to put up with some things that maybe are a little bit are challenging politically and are uncomfortable diplomatically. And we find ourselves in those moments, not just now, but all the time. It's a complicated world, and the Prime Minister is trying to manage it appropriately.
Well, James, I would say that most of the people we've had on the show to talk about this have largely agree with you that is a difficult but the right thing to do. But where is the line? Yeah. Like Vladimir Putin wouldn't be invited because of what's happening in Ukraine and the fact that he'd be arrested if he showed up. But the government of India stands credibly accused of violent acts, if not murder, against Canadian citizens, right? Like where is the line where a country simply isn't welcome?
Yeah, well, it's difficult because there is some gray area here, right? I mean, there's a line, there's an accusation, but they're not direct lines that are drawn. Some people may disagree with that, but there's a process for accountability, and if there are those, then there will be reprisals diplomatically, and I suppose future visits will be taken into account. With regard to Mr. Putin, he's a war criminal who invaded a country, and there's blood on his hands.
Yeah, totally.
That is without dispute. So. As someone once said, I think it was Henry Kissinger, foreign policy is a science of single instances, which is to say it's no science at all. These are individual relationships that have to be triaged in their own individual way. And again, it's complicated and it's difficult and it can be very uncomfortable at times, but the responsibility, these are all also relationships that are on a broad, centuries deep continuum. And this window of time of 2025 to 2027, 28, 29, however long Prime Minister Carney is Prime Minister, he has to manage these relationships as best he can with all of their imperfections. And every Prime Minister has that task.
Okay, Matthew, got 20 seconds and I got to say goodbye.
Well, I'm trying to square the circle of at what point do we say that that line exists, as you said, right? Like at the end of the day, this isn't just saying we're not going to talk to them at all. It's saying you're inviting the Prime Minister of a government who's allegedly been involved in acts of foreign interference up to and potentially allegedly including murder, right? And that's, you're inviting them to the G7. So to me, it's what message does that send? At what point does the economy stop being a priority? And at what point do we have to say, even if people aren't following this, there are individuals in this country who feel unsafe because of that, and the governments have to think of them too.
Okay, look, we got to leave it.
But you said the word, I appreciate that, but you said the word allegedly twice. Point one. Point two is there's also a lot of tension right now between India and Kashmir, and having Mr. Modi here at a time when those tensions are spiking and having an opportunity to engage and to have that conversation, maybe we can save thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives by having a tampering down of that tension in the world. That's also a contribution. These are all counterbalancing interests.
Right? Other ways to engage.
Okay, we have to stop the engagement because we're out of time. But we could keep this going. I want to thank you all: Shachya Kurl, Cameron Ahmad, James Moore, and Matthew Dubé.